Good morning, good afternoon, good morning to some of you. Welcome to our third session of our Washington Playbook series, getting us ready for the Washington Conference, which is, a week from today, we'll all be together. Those who are registered, hopefully a few of you who aren't registered, if you're on here, will register in the next week. Real excited to see everybody in person next week, especially here in Washington, D.C., where exciting time. Next week we'll walk through this a little bit in a few minutes, even interesting times that we'll have up on Capitol Hill and talking with folks on Capitol Hill. So let me start us out. Let's see. Can everybody see my screen? Yes, no? Everybody good? Okay. All right, well, good. Well, I'm also glad to be joined by Mollie Van Lieu, our Senior Director of Nutrition Policy here at United Fresh. And the two of us today are really going to focus on some of the key things that we want to share with you next week during the Washington Conference. So what I thought we would do is run through the schedule of events again, talk about congressional visits. We're getting a lot of questions from folks who are registered about it. So we'll give you the latest and greatest information we have as of today. Talk a little bit about what you should expect when you come here, when you go up to do your congressional visits. Then Mollie and I will also then touch on our key issues and provide you the latest updates and some of the key issues that we're going to be tackling next week. And then we'll have time for questions and discussions and a discussion about stuff that we may have missed or further clarification from today's schedule, from today's session. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So let's start with the schedule of events. Some of you have been on these webinars, previous webinars this year, have seen this basic schedule of events. Nothing has changed. We still have Monday, which is going to be primarily for our volunteer leaderships to meet. We've got the Produce Advocacy Boot Camp, and then our welcome reception as well. And then what I wanted to highlight a few things here, just to, again, to kind of talk through this and how we're preparing for next week. As I mentioned, one of the important events we're going to be having is the Produce Advocacy Boot Camp. And again, I would strongly suggest that even if you've been here before, to join us for that event, that session. It's going to be, I think, 3-hour session talking about what's happening on the Hill, different ways to connect with members of Congress and their staffs, key talking points, all of that stuff we'll be covering there. And I think it's important because once you see how we're setting up the congressional visits this year, it's going to be important for everybody to have a good foundation of what the issues are and what's important to us to kind of articulate or discuss with these congressional offices on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. I'll add to that the breakout sessions, education sessions. We have 4 breakout sessions. And if folks who were here in 2019 will remember, we're doing these a little differently, where we'll have a panel discussion for about 45 minutes to an hour. And then we'll have some time in each of those sessions to kind of talk about some of the key issues that may come up in their meetings. What should we be saying if these issues do come up or questions come up in these meetings? Things like that. We'll kind of do small group discussions and then bring that to the full group during those breakout sessions. But the 4 sessions include all the key issues, so food safety, nutrition, immigration, workforce, and transportation infrastructure issues. So those are really the 4 primary issues we're going to talk about. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes when we get into the issue discussion. And then obviously, as I mentioned, our Congressional Connections meetings, those are going to be on Tuesday afternoon after our breakfast and lunch, our breakfast session, our breakout sessions, then our lunch general session. Then we'll have there are Congressional Connections for day 1 on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, it'll be after our general breakfast session on Wednesday. Then after that, we will have another round of congressional visits on Wednesday. So just to kind of give you a framework of what we're dealing with when you get here, those who are coming, few things we wanted to point out. Most importantly, I want to remind you, these are just a few of the takeaways. There'll be a much more detailed email that will come to you, those who have registered on this Thursday, September 16th. That'll kind of walk you through a lot of the things, including issue topics, our issue brief that we're going to have, background information. All of that will be in that Thursday email that'll be sent out to those who have registered. But in particular, I wanted to remind a few things. So, as with a lot of things going on right now, masks, because of DC requirements, are going to be required for all indoor events and Congressional Connection meetings. It's going to be important to share your cell phone numbers, so we can make sure we're connecting people, making sure they get to their meetings on time. Obviously, as we've done before, since the House and Senate will be in session, this will be a business attire event. As I mentioned to you, you will be getting information about your congressional meetings. We will be sending that to you hopefully by Friday, this Friday. And then also it'll be available on site as when you get here and get your information background. And then, as I mentioned earlier, really take advantage of the education sessions. These, go back and look at the other two webinars we've hosted. Again, we'll send a lot of that out on Thursday's email. Please take some time to kind of get yourself at least a good solid foundation on the issues that we're going to be talking about. So with that, what I wanted to kind of talk to you about is kind of what's happening right now on Capitol Hill, the campus on Capitol Hill. Basically, it is open, but it has controlled access. So what does that mean? So basically, as of right now, as of today, and I don't expect it to change next week, people who are going into the congressional offices, they must be escorted in and out of the building. So in other words, once we get there, there will be groups who will be met with from a congressional office that they have a meeting with, escorted into the building, to the meeting, and then escorted back out. That is just the rules right now going on in the meetings or on the Capitol Hill campuses. A lot of it has to do with COVID, but some of it has to do also with the security issues that they've experienced, obviously, earlier this year. Most of the meetings are going to be very small. Most groups are asking, or at least most offices are asking for no more than 5 people. Some have expanded it to 10, a few expanded it to 10, but really they're going to be smaller and they're not going to be the big teams we've had in the past. Once you get there to the buildings, you must provide information regarding COVID. So basically, as you traditionally have done, if you've been to the meetings before, you go through the metal detector and then go to your meetings. They also will be asking you, on top of showing your ID, some health screening questions. So have you been sick? Have you got a fever or a cough? All that type of information will be asked when you get there. And actually, we will tell you that since we've been making these congressional meetings and getting them set up for you guys, there have been a few offices that have asked for additional health screening information. Some are asking, a few are asking about if you've been vaccinated or not. Those offices that have asked that type of information, we will be getting those attendees who go to those offices the information or the request of forms to fill out prior to the meeting. So don't worry about that on site. We will be getting you that once we get all the meetings scheduled. And once if an office wants additional information, we will make sure those people going into that meeting will have that type of information. The other interesting new thing that's kind of going on to control the flow of people coming in and out of the congressional offices is there's only one entrance for the House and Senate office buildings that you can go in and out of. All the other entrances are closed. So it will be a focal point for each building, that we will be going to get people in and out of the House and Senate office buildings. The other important thing is you can't linger in the building. So in other words, where traditionally we kind of roam around the offices or around the buildings to go from one building to another. Unfortunately, they're not allowing us to do that now. Again, if you go to a meeting in the Rayburn House office building, for instance, and your next meeting's in Cannon, you have to go out of the Rayburn building, walk over to the Cannon and go into that entrance. So unfortunately, that is just the way it is this year. Hopefully that will change and we'll have a much more open process in future Washington conferences. But that is kind of where we are at this point based on us being able to have these meetings with the members of Congress and what the Capitol folks are telling us as we speak. So with that all in place, some of the things that we're working on right now is that obviously we'll have buses like we had before to the Capitol each day. We'll have House and Senate buses that'll be going and unloading. We will have points of contact at each building. So our plan is to have at least two, maybe one to two people, maybe even more at each office building entrance. So in other words, our plan right now, our plan is going to be where we will have staff there. We will make sure the groups are together. We will then reach out to that congressional office you have a meeting with. If you're in a group in a group for a meeting, they will come out and get you, bring you into the meeting, and then bring you back out, and then we will get you set up for your next meeting, whether it's in that building again or it's in another building on the Capitol or in the Capitol Hill campus. We'll have plenty of handouts, talking points, leave behinds, a lot of stuff to kind of make sure we get the right messaging across this year. And then obviously we will have very clear guides, maps. We'll have maybe some folks stationed in between, so we make sure people are flowing back and forth to the buildings. Again, you know, this is the way we're going to have to do it this year, and hopefully we will have a better, more traditional way of doing our business on Capitol Hill next year. So with all that being said, as I mentioned earlier, it's not going to be the traditional teams, so to speak. They're going to be smaller in-person meetings on Capitol Hill. There will be some instances where we will have locations close to the congressional offices, right outside the congressional House and Senate offices, where there might be larger meetings. So if a congressman or a senator has a large group, they can't bring in 20 people into a congressional office. We're working with them to come out of their buildings to meet us at a location that's near their office, so they can have a full discussion with all their constituents who've come into the town for our Washington conference. The good news is the vast majority of our meetings will be with the member and senator. It's one of the good things going on right now that they do have time to do this. I think you know, our discussions with the offices are very excited that their constituents are coming into town to do this event, and they want to make sure they have some time to meet with their constituents. We are projecting about 2 to 3 meetings per attendee. Our plan is to have as many as we can for attendees based on how, as we get more and more meetings this week, we'll kind of fill that in. But we are projecting right now to have at least, each of you will have at least 2 to 3 meetings during your congressional visits on Tuesday and Wednesday. This year, we're not going for quantity. So, having 6, 7, 8 meetings, really focusing on quality meetings. So what we've done is really focus, obviously, on constituent meetings, but more importantly, we're focusing on House and Senate leadership, committee leadership, where those issues are most important, that they need to reach out to us, or at least we need to reach out to them and talk about these issues that are very important. So it might be, like I mentioned, Senator McConnell, for instance, the minority leader in the Senate. We're going to be meeting probably with House and Senate Ag Committee chairman and ranking members. We're going to be meeting with, so we've got meetings set up with them. So there will be good quality meetings, topical meetings that'll be important to have this year to really focus in on our issues, and those people will be more up to speed on our issues than what you maybe traditionally have seen in other offices and other meetings you've had with other offices. And then the other thing I would say to plan for, to think about, is you may be with different people in each meeting you have. Again, just the way things are working out this year, we're not going to have the same teams for the most part. We're not going to have the same teams moving from one meeting to another. So there may be a meeting you go with five people, and then the next meeting there might be 2 of you go into that with the 3 other new people. So it's hard to really tell right now. But again, our goal this year is try to get you in front, get you on Capitol Hill, and get you in front of these elected leaders so we can talk about the important issues that are before us. So with all that being said, I'm going to put up a slide that I've always used, and it still holds true today, no matter if it's on Zoom, or if it's a virtual meeting, or if it's the meetings we're having next week. Really are the 6 key things that I think are important, that we think are important, to really have a good meeting with your elected official. And again, these are tight times, so try to keep it focused, factual, and informative. Make sure that they understand very quickly the relevance, why you're here, what you want to talk about. Make sure when you're having that discussions, you want to ask questions, even follow up at some level after the meeting with either the staff or the member's office, whether it's right after that, a thank you note, or hey, I'm checking in on this issue. Where do you guys think you are? And then I think 3 is really one of the most important things that you can relate. We talk to them on a policy to policy level every day from most of these offices about the policy impact. But if you can think about these issues we're going to be talking about next week, and try to personalize that with your business, your operation, your company, and making sure that they understand what this does impact your operations, that is going to be a critical message that will stick with them for a very long time. There are, as I mentioned, while most of the meetings are going to be with the members of Congress, they also will most likely have staff in that meeting, or you may be meeting with staff for part of the meeting or all the meeting. Remember, they are important allies. They are very important in terms of the information they share with the member of Congress and the senator. So treat them with respect, treat them as experts in their issues, and really kind of work with them, and it's a great way to make a good connection with an office, having that congressional staff connection with you and personalize that for future contact. Make a request. So in all of our meetings, we will have or all of our issues, we will have a request, support this, support that, don't support this, sign a letter, co-sponsor a bill. There's a lot of things, kind of call to action that we talk about, and we'll walk through some of that in a few minutes, and then next week as we get closer to our congressional meetings. And then finally, try to get a clear answer. That's one of the hardest things to do. A lot of members and even staff like to kind of go back and forth, and they'll think about it. They don't know much about the issue. Can you give me more information? Really try to push a little bit to try to get a good answer, because that helps us as a team when you come back with that information saying, hey, this congressman or their staff said they're at this position, or they're taking this position on the issues we're talking about. It's important that us to know that information so we can then do more follow-up with their offices and talk through it with them at a more policy level. So let me just quickly walk through, now that we kind of got through the congressional visits and kind of what it might look like and feel like, let me kind of talk through where we are at this point and what to expect when you get here next week. So I think there's kind of first and foremost, the Senate is back in session this week. So they just came back. They've been on their August break. As most of you know, they were working back and forth in early August for the couple of different major pieces of legislation, but they are now back in session this week. It's a short week for them, but they'll be back again next week. And then the House returns formally next week. I would say that, kind of some things, and I'll talk about this in a minute. There's really, you're going to probably hear a lot about several key phrases or words, the congressional concurrent resolution, the debt limit, disaster assistance, and reconciliation. You're going to hear a lot about that. I'm going to try to, in a minute or so, kind of walk you through what each of those things mean in a very short and precise way. But you will hear a lot about that next week in the meetings that you have, because that is really top of mind at the moment. I even put on here, like we just learned this weekend, that we have zebras roaming free in the district in Maryland. They've gotten loose from a farm. So we're, as I said, everything can happen. Anything can happen here in DC. So you might even see some zebras down the mall near the Capitol or so. They haven't caught them yet. So we're still everybody's trying to figure out where they are now and seeing what happens. They're not from the zoo either. They're from a farm in Maryland somewhere. So it is a crazy time to be here. So let me really quickly talk about kind of these 4 terms that you're going to hear a lot about before we really get into our issues. So one of the key things that in the end of September, and some of you have been here when we've had this situation, is the government each year gets their annual funding, and it has to be approved by the end of September. So that's the fiscal year. So for most part, and some of you may be aware, know, the government has shut down because they haven't got the funding passed by Congress and signed by the president to keep the government running. So we've had several situations when we had our Washington conference that the government has shut down. So what they're doing right now, what they're all going back and forth about is how to keep the government open. So a CR is a concurrent resolution, continuing resolution, excuse me. And that's basically saying, all right, we're going to take the current amount of money that is being run the government now and keep it going for a certain amount of time until we can come up with a new budget, a new funding budget by the end of this year. So you hear a lot about that next week, about the CR. You'll hear that acronym. It really means keeping the government running. The debt limit, that'll be another thing you hear a lot about. This is a ability for the government to continue to borrow money, believe it or not. The last time the debt limit was increased was in 2019. So this is another big political issue, a big issue that you're going to hear a lot about next week, about will they increase the debt limit before it runs out in October. It doesn't have to be done in September, but it is something I think you're going to hear and read about when you're here in town. The other thing that's come up, obviously, with Hurricane Ida and then the Afghan refugees that are here, is another disaster relief funding bill. Now, this bill, because it'll be an emergency funding, doesn't require any offsets, so to speak, or any reduction in government spending. So again, they're working through that this week and next week as well. And what they're trying to do is put everything into one little package. So keep the government running and disaster relief all in one package. And finally, what you're going to hear a lot about next week, is it's really kind of come to a head, is reconciliation. And I don't want to bog you down with what it means, but basically it's a very weird DC government type word. I don't even know how to explain it, that requires, that gets you around the Senate. It's mostly used in the Senate to get you around having to get 60 votes so they can get a simple majority using reconciliation. And what it basically means is really, it means that anything that they put into a reconciliation piece of legislation, it has to have an impact on the budget. Either it has to spend money, or it has to create new resources, or create new revenue, new resources. So when you look at what's in, and what they're debating right now, and we'll be debating very aggressively next week, is the reconciliation package that includes potential tax increases and tax cuts. It may include immigration. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then also it will most likely include climate and nutrition funding through USDA. And then Mollie and I can talk about that as well in a few minutes when we get into the issues. But it is going to be, there will be no Republican support for this. Democrats are, it's going to be passed, if Democrats are going to try to move it through. But it's really controversial. You're going to hear a lot about that. People who come and speak to us when you're in your meetings. I mean, again, those 4 issues are going to be the things, or 4 terms you're going to hear a lot about next week. So we wanted to at least give you a very basic understanding or primer on these issues and what they mean when you hear them, and you don't just roll your eyes and they waste time talking to you about these issues, but we need to get to our issues. So now I want to turn a little bit to our issues. So, and the question is how, with all that other stuff going on, how do our issues fit into this discussion? So there's really 4 areas we're going to be focusing our attention on next week: the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and then nutrition priorities. I'm going to talk about the first 3 and then turn over to Mollie to talk about the 4th. But what I'd like to also spend just a minute on right now is at the end of this, when we talk through all this, we will have some time for questions and discussion. So if you'd like to ask a question, there's several ways to do that, or you want to raise your hand using the raise your hand function in Zoom. You can put it in the chat box and we'll recognize you. So think about some questions you may have that we can try to answer during this webinar before we end at 3 o'clock or 3 o'clock Eastern time. So let me talk a little bit about the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And as I'm sure all of you know, it's already passed the House in March of last year, or excuse me, this year. And really it provides the basic framework for what we have been advocating for many, many years. It legalizes the current workforce and creates an earned status adjustment. It reforms the H-2A program. So there are things in there we don't like. There are things that with any piece of legislation, not everybody agrees with, but it really does set a framework for what we have been advocating for many, many years. Now, since that bill has passed, we have been working in the Senate. The Senate is currently considering this piece of legislation now that the House has passed it. And we're very excited the House passed it in a bipartisan fashion. So our goal really in the Senate is to use this bill to create a new piece of legislation that the Senate would consider. They have not introduced a bill, but there are several senators working on this. So they're being led by Senator Bennett from Colorado, Senator Crapo from Idaho, and also involved is Senator Feinstein from California, and Senator Tillis from North Carolina. So you got 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats working on a bill using the Farm Worker Modernization Act as kind of the foundation for a new piece of legislation. This has been going pretty well. You know, they've talked, we've had meetings with them, they've shared information, and then all of a sudden reconciliation, that ugly word I'm going to use again, came up. And basically under reconciliation, what the Democrats are trying to do is they are using the reconciliation process to create a policy that legalizes certain undocumented individuals here in the United States. And that's going to include farm workers, it's going to include dreamers and other essential workers. So what's happened now, unfortunately, is that's really stopped the bipartisan discussions in the Senate. And because of this going on, it really has created an atmosphere of we got to wait and see how this reconciliation package works out. So, and again, we should know more by the time you get here next week, whether it will be included or not. There are some discussions of whether or not it would be included or not, but we should have much more, kind of clarity next week of what to say. But the bottom line for us is, we need a solution that does both things. It both legalizes the current workforce, but also creates reforms in H-2A. Having just one part fixed does not solve the problem for the immigration issues we're facing in agriculture. So what we're going to be talking about next week is really driving consensus, bringing back that bipartisan effort to really reform both the H-2 program while legalizing the current workforce. So then I want to talk about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021. So this passed the Senate. It had a price tag of around $1 trillion. About half of that was new money that was being authorized. And if you look at here, the breakdown, this is kind of where the priorities are that we support in terms of investment in our infrastructure here in the United States. So roads and bridges, ports and waterways, dealing with climate change, and then obviously the $8 billion that's going to be invested in Western Water Project that is much needed to address some of the drought issues going on in California and other Western states that are important to our industry. So it's a much needed and timely, we've been talking about this for decades, not just a few years, of creating a new infrastructure, or at least putting money into infrastructure investment in this country. And these are the areas that we think are most important in the legislation that was passed out of the Senate. And again, on a bipartisan vote a couple months ago, or excuse me, in August. So for this bill in particular, it is slated for a House vote on September 27th, which is a week after you guys get here. So it'll be an important week to have these discussions with these House and Senate offices about, well, it's the House in particular, since it's going to be voted for in the House, about the importance of having an Infrastructure Investment Act passed the Congress and signed by the President. This will be an up and down vote. There will not be any amendments. The Senate negotiated this bill with feedback from the Senate, or excuse me, from the House, in the White House. So this bill is kind of a package that's either going to pass or not. We expect it to pass on September 27th. We expect it to be bipartisan. There will be a number of folks who will support this bill in both Democrat and Republican side. And so we have been very happy to see this bill moving forward in a positive direction. So before I turn over to Mollie, I want to finish on one more issue, and this is the Food Safety Modernization Act. And I'm really excited about our ability to focus on this for the next week. And I will mention that we've got about over 30 food safety folks from our Food Safety and Technology Council who are going to be going up the Capitol Hill to reach out to a lot of different offices to talk about some of the issues that are still actually out there related to the Food Safety Modernization Act. And believe it or not, it's been 10 years since its passage, but there's several things that need to get finished that will help more clearly ability for our industry to address some of the issues, the regulatory issues that are out there. In particular, the farm definition remains unfunctional. If you remember, there was a definition of what's considered an on-farm, what's considered off-farm in terms of facilities. It remains really unfunctional and doesn't work for our industry. So we're really trying to push Congress to look at this and try to help us have a clearer, push FDA to have a clearer definition. And then the ag water requirements regulation have not been finalized. Again, it's been 10 years. We need some certainty in that space. We need Congress to push FDA and the administration to bring some further clarity to what are going to be the ag water requirements under the Food Safety Modernization. There's some other areas of discussion, in particular, FDA's flexibility related to remote inspections. As a lot of you may know, during this time of COVID, FDA has been doing travel restrictions, and they haven't been able to go to facilities. They've been doing a lot of remote inspection type interaction with the industry. We'd like to see that more permanent in terms of that. And then cyclospora is a big issue that I know a lot of folks have spent some time on. And as we've kind of walked through this, there's really a needed target research funding and more research to answer some of the questions that are around cyclospora that potentially impact the fresh produce industry. We're looking for more funding, more direction from Congress to the research entities in the federal government, whether it's FDA or USDA, to look at this more closely and address some of these issues. So I've talked long enough. I need a water break. I'm going to turn over to Mollie. Mollie, you want me just to do the slides, I guess?
Sure, yeah.
I guess I have control. I got
water and at the same time. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So Mollie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Robert. And good to see. So I could see some of you, but thank you for joining, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next week after a long break of in-person events. So Robert gave me a hard time. I have several slides compared to the other issues, but there are a lot of issues in nutrition. So I wanted to kind of lay them out as you think about your meetings next week. So the first one is child nutrition reauthorization. And in previous webinars, we've discussed our specific priorities. So we will have a one-pager that gives all of we have about 6 specific child nutrition reauthorization asks. That bill has not been reauthorized since 2010. We were hoping that it would be reauthorized this year. The writing's going to on the wall that that's not going to happen. Instead, there will be some provisions that traditionally would live in child nutrition reauthorization that may be part of the reconciliation process that Robert mentioned. Most of those provisions are part of Biden's Build Back Better priorities. So some of them align with things that we have identified as priorities, but not all of our priorities are certainly in there. So the message there, just to be really realistic, we can't necessarily come in and say, like, we want you guys to do child nutrition before the end of the year. It's not really, frankly, a good use of our time, because the reality is that that's not going to happen. What we can do is say, these are child nutrition reauthorization priorities. We would like to see this through reconciliation. And again, you'll get that information on those specifics, and we've talked about them in previous webinars, so I don't want to spend too much time on those specifics, but happy to chat with you guys next week about that as well. I did want to flag that something that you may hear about for those of you, and I was looking, and some of you on the webinar today do service schools either directly or your product makes its way there. Schools are having a huge problem right now with accessing product, and that's not fresh produce specific. In fact, in reaching out to folks that serve schools, it sounds like that's not really been an issue with fresh produce. If anything, in some cases, schools are ordering more because they are not getting products like chicken that they're used to getting. So they're kind of taking their entitlement dollars from the federal government and moving it around and buying more fresh produce. We've also heard that some distributors fresh produce distributors are able to kind of step in and provide other products like salad dressing, like straws. I mean, schools are in a really tough place right now, and a lot of broadliners are canceling their contracts altogether. So I know that that's top of mind for lawmakers. I know that's not kind of an issue that we are going to talk about, because it doesn't sound like it's impacted fresh produce much. And if it has, that's something that would be good to know. But it does provide an opportunity to, one, I think you guys are going to hear that. Lawmakers are going to ask about that, because their schools are just really contacting them and saying they're in dire straits. So if you have data and information you can share about how you are meeting the need of schools, I think this is a great opportunity for us to really show our value. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Next slide, Robert, please. So WIC, so this one's super timely. We've talked about this before. So the rescue plan earlier this year increased the fruit and vegetable benefit in WIC temporarily from $9 to $35 a month. So a huge increase in that. And it was funded through September 30th. And the idea was that USDA was going to come in and make that permanent. No surprise, if you've been doing policy for a while, things are not lining up perfectly. So what we do need is an increase, some funding from Congress in order to ensure that those benefits don't lapse. And that's something everybody's kind of on board with. The White House has sent that over as a request to Congress that in the continuing resolution, and the concept of the continuing resolution is that you just fund things as is, but they do need a little bit more money in order to do this. So that expires, as Robert has said, September 30th. So next week is really excellent timing on that. The folks that need to hear about it the most are Republican senators. That's kind of the folks that need to hear that message a little bit from their constituents to let them know that that we support that. So next week we will be asking for that to extend that cash value benefit for fruits and vegetables through the CR. Again, we'll have a one-pager on that, some partnership with National WIC Association. And then the last one, Robert, if we could go to the last slide, please, or next to last slide, is the produce box, or produce purchasing. We're going to be mindful of how we talk about it. So the Farmers to Families program that sunsetted in June of this year. We have gone over this in previous webinars too, if you want some additional information. USDA established the new TFAP fresh produce box, but it's not serving the full need. It's not really providing a wide variety of fresh fruits and vegetables like a program is fully capable of doing if it's constructed in the right way. So we've been working really hard to get a standalone program introduced in Congress, and we're really close, and I'm putting that on the universe that we're gonna make this happen. So if the stars align, we will have a bill to talk about next week, very timely. So more information on that coming soon. So our message, and again, we'll have this fine-tuned by them, there's just so many moving parts right now, is that we support a standalone new program, taking the lessons learned, making it better and improved. And so we'll ask for support for that with our members of Congress and for them to co-sponsor pending that is introduced. So we'll talk a lot more about that next week when we have one of the education sessions is focused on that. So there's a lot of things we could talk about with nutrition, but I just kind of our top line 2 policy asks, and depending on what you do, you might have some more things to say if you're like really in the child nutrition school meal space. But our 2 top line nutrition asks are to support a permanent fresh produce purchasing program, the bill that I was just referencing, and then extending that fruit and vegetable benefit in WIC through the continuing resolution. So that's my stuff. If you have any questions, please let me know. I know I went through that quickly. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Molly. And again, pressure's on Molly. We're excited that we might have be advocating for some bills on some things that have been important to our industry over the last 18 months. So next week could be a kind of a cool moment to be able to go up there and push a bill to get co-sponsors and things like that. So we're crossing our fingers, but we feel, we're in a good shape right now to have that announcement next week. So it'll be good stuff to be for stuff versus against stuff. That's always a good thing. So as I mentioned, I sent a chat to everyone. We can do some questions and discussions. I'm actually going to stop the share right now. Let's see. Molly, did you see the questions about the WIC on the chat?
I did not.
You see it? You want me to read it to you?
Can you read it out loud, please?
Yeah, how about the multiplier where EBT cards of WIC recipients could get 2 times or 3 times the money on fresh produce? Is it based on individual states?
Yeah, so that is the GusNIP program. If it's federal funding or double up bucks kind of style, used to be called FINI, lots of different acronyms. That is exists, but you are right. I'm sorry, I didn't see the question, so I just kind of piecing together based on what Robert said. It doesn't exist everywhere. That's not an entitlement like WIC. Like anybody who enrolls in WIC gets the same exact benefit. Every single state has opted into the WIC increase. The double up buck style is specific to SNAP, and it's a large program in that it's doubled funding over the past few years, and there was some emergency funding for it. But it is not everywhere by any stretch of the imagination. So that exists where those programs exist. A lot of it is in farmers markets, and there are absolutely independent retailers. West Coast, Safeway participates in Washington State, so that does exist. But it is not an entitlement that's available to everyone enrolled in SNAP.
Great. Marissa, I see your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks, guys. This is all really helpful. One question that maybe we'll dive into a little bit more with the session on fresh produce purchasing is there an incentive? Is there a proposal for incentives in SNAP like incentives in WIC? Will we get questions back about that versus a purchasing program?
So is there an incentive? Could you clarify? Is there, and hi Marissa.
Hi.
Thank you. So is there an incentive like WIC in SNAP?
Yeah, is there like a proposal for that? I guess what I'm anticipating is kind of pushbacks of, should we use the existing infrastructure of SNAP and create an incentive in that? I don't know if there's any legislation proposed with that, and just how you kind of want us to respond in that regard.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So on that, where we have focused, and that is one of those things that's in the 6 child nutrition reauthorization priorities that we didn't get into as much detail today, is that we would like to see in the EBT for kids, the SNAP increase for kids that's just part of the reconciliation process. This is where it gets really confusing. We'd love to see something like the WIC fruit and vegetable benefit attached to that as part of the kids EBT. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, and we'll go over.
Marissa, yeah, one other thing I would add, maybe this is, Molly, you can tell me to be quiet because I kind of dip my toe in nutrition stuff every now and then. But the SNAP also the policy on SNAP is really going to be a farm bill discussion than it is child nutrition too. So I think, that's not, obviously farm bill isn't come up till 2023. So there's gonna be a lot more focus on SNAP starting next year into the 2023 as well.
Great.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, Robert. And I think we're going to want to be really clear too that with the purchasing program, like that is separate from SNAP.
Yes.
How USDA is always doing purchases, right, of food, and we're asking for a greater percentage of those to be fresh produce through this purchasing program, which while it goes to people who are in need, it's separate from the SNAP program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Come on. All these smart people on here. I know you got some tough questions we can try to answer for you.
Sure, I'll come up with a question for you.
All right, Donna. Go ahead.
So are we gonna, we'll meet again at that produce advocacy camp, right?
Mhm.
You guys actually, like, before you've given out like little index cards of things that we want to hit, and then so we have that, then we can try to come up with personal stories to connect. Will you be doing that again?
Exactly. Yes, we will be doing all that. All of that, traditionally what you've gotten, profiles of members of Congress, that you're going to be visiting with, some background on them, where they may stand on our issues, or we don't even know where they stand on some of these issues maybe, but we'll have all that ready for you next week, if not before. I'm looking at Angela.
So in that produce advocacy camp, is that what you kind of go over, or what's really in that?
So the agenda for the boot camp I think it's just been published or out there, and we can send that out to everybody again. But basically, it's going to be several things. It's going to be role playing. So how to do a meeting with a congressional office. We'll do a little bit of that. We'll talk about the issues that we're going to, kind of add to what we've talked about today. We'll also have a discussion from the Congressional Management Foundation about kind of the current trends post-COVID, for instance, and how, offices are utilized, or how offices are working now in a post-COVID era. They've got some interesting information there. And then we'll have industry folks also talking about, some of the key tactics that help during a meeting. But yes, there will be further discussion about the issues during the advocacy boot camp. And then
Great.
to dive deeper, the education sessions on Tuesday will dive deeper into each of those issues.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Hey, Molly, another question about nutrition. What's with universal meals? That's been a thing that people have been talking about as far as once these waivers are done, whether that could be something that's incorporated into just the regular deal. Is that going to be through CNR or reconciliation, or where does that play?
Yeah, great question. So what Alex was talking about is right now schools can serve during COVID and through the end of this school year, schools can serve all school meals free to students, no charge to the student. And there's been a push to make that permanent. That outside of emergency spending is huge. That is something we support, but it's hugely expensive. So it's challenging. So what they are doing instead is expanding what's called the community eligibility provision that says that if you're in a school with a certain percentage of high free and reduced price lunch students, you can serve meals free to all kids. And that's something that exists already, but they're lowering the threshold, and that will be done through reconciliation. So I think full universal meals, as folks have been talking about, will have to be something probably for whenever they do child nutrition reauthorization. But in the interim, there's going to be a significant expansion start beginning next year if reconciliation goes through of expanding that community eligibility.
Thanks.
Mr. Bailey, you have a question?
Yeah, it's been a few years since I've attended one of these. Last time I did, I came in like a bull in a china shop. But I see your infrastructure policy that we need to talk about, roadways. But the water system in the Western United States is really going to be tested in the next 24 to 36 months with new changes to the law. And with the current, I guess, climate change, I hate using that term, but our reservoirs we're all built, at least in the Western United States, our reservoirs were built in the 60s. That was 50 years ago, and they're not, now we have to do improvements on them because of the Orville incident we had 2 years ago. Moving forward, we don't have water any longer with the population. These reservoirs were built in the 60s, the population's double what we had back then. So we really need to push. I mean, we passed an $8 billion water infrastructure bond in the state of California. 10% of it's been spent. The rest of the money's sitting in Sacramento. I'm tired of screaming up in Sacramento. Hopefully, these people in Washington can listen a little bit more. We have a water problem, and they're going to take 1 million acres of ground out of production for 2022 in the San Joaquin Valley. That's not a little bit, that's a lot, folks. And it's going to affect everyone. The Salinas Valley is going to change. The Imperial Valley is going to change. All the growing regions in California are going to change drastically. I hate to emphasize, but we really need to wave the flag on this infrastructure program and get some money spent on water projects.
Yeah, John, you make a great point. It's probably one of the main reasons we are supporting this bill is because of what they've done thus far. It's not nearly enough. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we're not just talking about, as you mentioned, $8 billion alone in California, where they just invested $8 billion throughout the entire Western states. So that money, I don't know how far that money is going to go, but it's certainly a movement in the right direction. But you're right, John, that this is not a fix. This is just a temporary. We got to keep pushing for additional resources, and that comes with a lot of tricky stakeholders, whether it's environmental stakeholders, urban stakeholders, obviously the agriculture stakeholder. You live it every day. I know out there, you guys in California. So we just got to keep pushing them to do more and more of that.
Thank you.
Yep. No, good thoughts. Mollie, did you see the question on seniors?
I did, yeah, I answered it. So
okay.
Question was anything targeting seniors. So the fresh produce bundle or box concept that we're pushing would allow that fresh produce to go to any agency, any nonprofit, any food bank that serves seniors as well, because the existing senior targeted program at USDA only serves shelf stable. So definitely a challenge there.
Then another question came up on the chat from Dante about the 30 by 30 program for USDA. This is the climate change, one of the climate change proposals that's come out of the administration and USDA. I'm not hearing much about that, Dante, and others. I'm not aware of too many questions from the Hill. So I don't know if it's going to come up or not. It may come up in specific offices, but we're not being asked questions about it at this point. But, with anything, you got to be aware of all this. I agree. Jack, you got a question?
Yeah, so a question about the food box program. Are we focusing on the Feeding America network? Or are we focusing on all nonprofits that are 501c3 certified, or do they have to be registered with a DHSS to receive those boxings based off of the government funding that was already allocated like before the produce box? Because I do know like during the produce box under the previous administration, it was really just based off of the relationship built with the distributor.
Yeah, great question, Jack. So the concept we're pushing is that it would be a little bit more managed by USDA. So it wouldn't kind of be up to the distributors alone to make those connections anymore, since it'll be a permanent program, but it will be available to the existing TPAP network, which in more simple terms is the Feeding America network essentially. But then any other entity that already exists in USDA programs, so public schools could access it, YMCA's, Boys and Girls Clubs that already participate in USDA feeding programs. And then there would be a new mechanism in which USDA would have to approve nonprofits that aren't part of either one of those networks. That as long as you say that you meet, that you serve individuals that are food and nutrition insecure and you have, basic food safety understanding, you'd be approved and could be part of that network. So it's much more inclusive. So similar to Farmers to Families, but with a little bit more structure to it, since it will be something that we're hoping to see in non-emergency times as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
We got time for one more question if anybody has one. Well, okay, if not, we want to thank all of you for being on the call today, on the webinar. We're really excited to see a lot of you, all of you, hopefully, next week. We have a great agenda being set up and still being filled out, so more to come on that this week in terms of folks participating. We'll have more meetings, obviously, congressional meetings that we're working on as we speak. Look forward to seeing everybody next week, and we will see you, which I haven't said in a long time, soon. So again, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks very much.